Okay, thank you very much for joining today for our roundtable discussion on how the new employee experience will drive a safe and seamless workplace reentry. I will just give the word to our panelists to introduce themselves. So Annie, if you want to start, please go ahead.
Of course. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone out there. My name is Annie Rinker, and first and foremost, I'm currently sitting in an office, which personally is an incredible feeling. I'm based out of Houston, Texas. I work at Hines in our group called Management Services, specifically in our Hines Workplace Service Division. And my main responsibility is looking at operations and all things dealing with flexible office. So for Hines, flexible office means a lot of different things. It means a co-working brand that we carry called The Square, which we are looking to implement in several of our projects across the globe. But I think it is also a spectrum, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit today, but really glad to be here with this great panel and speaking with all of you.
Thank you, Annie. Neil?
I echo that. Thanks very much for allowing me to join the panel, and welcome to everyone. I'm an independent facilities consultant operating out of the UK on a global footing, and I'm particularly focused at trying to understand the practicalities of operating space in the post-COVID world.
Great, thank you, Neil. And then on behalf of our co-host today, Liquid Space, Mark.
Yeah. Thank you, and Annie, Neil, great to join the both of you. My name is Mark Gilbreth. I'm the founder and CEO of Liquid Space. We are a global marketplace of on-demand flexible office and an enterprise workplace management platform that in today's market and world is providing companies with the only enterprise grade solution to be able to manage the hybrid and distributed workplace strategies that are fast becoming the norm for most companies. Like Annie, I too am in an office today. In fact, I'm actually going to be on a plane tomorrow on a business trip. And so, into the air, flying to a major metro market for an afternoon of meetings in conference rooms and collaborative space. And so, yes, it's good to be on the other side of a pretty epic chapter in the office industry, and excited to talk about what the implications are. Thanks for joining.
Great, thank you, Mark. And last but not least, Harish.
All right, thank you all for joining. Thank you, Anna, and thanks to our attendees. Yeah, I guess we're 50-50 here. We got two of us in potentially hybrid locations and two in offices that are traveling, and this is the new normal in some sense. So no judgment, no matter where you are. The work is where the work happens, I guess. So I'm Harish Perry. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Proxyclick. And Proxyclick is an enterprise visitor management company, but we have a bigger mission, which is to connect people with the places they need to be. So whether that's visitors to lobbies, whether that is employees to workplaces, whether that is contractors to job sites, we are on a mission to make that connection happen safely, securely, smoothly for both the person and the place. So that's our longer term goal. And yeah, let's get right into it. I guess I'll play the role of question guy / moderator. But this is a lively group, so I don't think I need to moderate too much. So we were talking about what would be useful for the audience, especially in this moment in time where there's across the board there's some light at the end of the tunnel. Vaccinations are happening. If you use the four of us as a sample, some kind of office normalcy is returning, but we do know that the new world of work is for sure not going to be like the old world of work. So what we would like today, our goal would be for everyone in the audience to walk away with some actionable tips, some strategies, some things they can take back to their own organizations about how to implement this new world of work / hybrid workplace. So I think I want to start with sort of the top of the pyramid, if you will, the strategy angle. And Neil, maybe lob it over to you and say, if you adopt sort of a global lens, at an organizational lens, what's a good way to think about a cohesive strategy that also, respects sort of the economic conditions of a company when thinking about a new type of workplace or hybrid workplace?
I think that if you take a strategic view for most organizations, it's a strategy, structure, people route, really. And for a lot of businesses at the moment, the issue is whether or what they can afford to deliver to their people in terms of the space that they make available. And in many ways, it's about rationalizing that space as much as they can. Now, that's done through lease breaks or trying to vacate as much of the own space as they have, leaving them with an amount that they then reposition in order to enable their resources, their people resources to operate effectively. So from a strategic perspective, what we're seeing is moving out of space as much as possible and as quickly as possible. And if they can't move out of space, they're segmenting their space strategically into to maximize the vacant space, which they can then operate from a lights out perspective. So, we block it off and no one goes in there, and that's the cheapest way we can manage that space. Now, what that does is it creates an opportunity to manage the occupied space, if you will, in a very, very different way. And of course, the other strategy change for me is that over this particular period, home working or working from home, and they're two different things, but they both talk to operating outside the standard office workplace, is now a real defined piece of space. And when you're looking at the real estate strategy, it is one of those areas of consideration, whereas I think a couple of years ago, it wasn't really in the forefront of anyone's mind.
Right. And what's your sense of sort of a global outlook on that? Because a lot of our customers have multi-country footprints. So like, how would you weave in a global angle into that strategy decision?
Well, I think that most well, from a vacating space perspective, it's a global thing, and whichever you can get out of and how fast you can get out of it, I think is the key. So that is where it's dependent upon, I guess, institutional real estate agreements and so forth in different different nations. But what I would say is that as a thought-provoking occupancy type approach, the space segmentation that effectively moves as much of your structural or common space, your welfare space, your meeting space, your business space, and now home working, to create a balance of the space that you have, is now obviously the objective. And you just drive that through in any international conditions. It's just a straight decision strategically, but the overall view is to maximize the vacant space and then shed that as quickly as you can. That's what I'm reading, and certainly that is what is happening in my geography.
Right. And so I think Mark and Annie, you guys are at the forefront of implementing this, given that you're in the business of space. What are you guys seeing in terms of how, because what we want people to walk away with is how should they actually think about their space, and then we can get to the technology supporting that space. But what are you guys seeing from your customers? What are you hearing from the market in terms of how this new world, hybrid world, is actually being implemented? I'll lob it to either of you. Annie, if you want to go first.
Yeah, and Mark, I know you're going to probably touch on the technology that can help support this. But I think Neil touched on this, but if you think about current space allocation, and I will be very honest, I'm biased towards office. That's what I do. It's what I live for. And so I know that this changes obviously as you start talking about the different asset classes, and especially when you incorporate industrial into it, and geography does play a lot into it as well. But if you think about office and space allocation, historically it's been 60%, sometimes more, sometimes less, it's allocated to that dedicated space, where then you have sort of shared spaces and amenities and services that take up the remainder. And I think, what we're shifting is this, we're seeing this realignment of space, and some of that might be because of a lease, a lease trigger that's upcoming. And so you might be shedding space, as Neil stated. I think we will see that, but I think the big thing is that we're just shifting that footprint. So it actually might be the same footprint that would happen, but instead of that sort of 60% threshold of dedicated, we're focusing on shared spaces taking up more and amenity space taking up more. So it's this whole realignment to support the return to office. And I think that's kind of where we are right now. But what we're going to continue to shift is like that becoming a full ecosystem of different working environments. And now that dedicated space might further branch out into working from home, into the hub and spoke model, into, shared spaces becoming more on-demand type products coming from flex office operators, companies like Liquid Space helping to support that from a technology standpoint for enterprise. But I think that just all becomes, less space, but we're focusing more on experience. And I think the big thing for people on this call to think about and realize is that with that shift and that focus on experience, that you need to have an active hand in managing space. And that wasn't something that was really thought about from the property management standpoint, the portfolio management standpoint, the office management standpoint. None of those positions really necessarily took an active management role. And I think that's something that we're going to see shift, because this hybrid work for many people in the office is here to stay. And that means that if you want to have that collaboration, which is why people will come to the office, you have to actively manage the space to incorporate that collaboration. Otherwise, you'll have some people coming in one day a week, some people coming in another day a week. There's not collaboration. And so what's the point of returning to the office? And so, I think that's the biggest thing here, is that right now we might see similar space shifting priorities, going to smaller space with a shifting priority, but then layering on these additional areas that weren't previously part of the conversation. And with that comes active management.
Yeah, jumping in, if I may, Harish.
Please.
I think as evidenced by Neil and Annie's comments, there are sort of two quite dramatic changes or work streams that are now in flight with most mid-sized and large enterprises as it relates to workplace. As Neil touched on, there is an active and pervasive work stream around rationalizing the portfolio. And from the work that we're doing with enterprise clients, the mean sort of scale of rationalization objective is substantial. It's in the realm of 30%. And as Neil touched on, the pace of that rationalization is of course going to be gated by lease dates and the like, and the opportunity to sublet. But that's an enormous recalibration. The other work stream, the other sort of acceleration that Annie sort of began to illustrate, is an incredible attention to sort of the people-centric assessment, the employee-centric assessment of workplace. And further to that, it's quite evident to most companies now that sort of the binary options of the HQ that we evacuated last year and home are not sufficient. That in many cases, there's a yearning for and an opportunity to tap into additional spaces, be they hubs or spokes, be they co-working spaces or environments provided directly by institutional landlords like Hines. What's become clear now is that there's going to be an and, right? There's going to, like, the workplace is going to be this remaining but rationalized and in many ways remapped and reconfigured portfolio. And it's going to be complemented by a pervasive ecosystem of flexible office options. And that turns out that's actually pretty hard, right? It's a significant challenge for employers to give employees access to the right places to work. It's a multidimensional challenge and problem. There's duty of care around health and safety. As Annie and Neil both touched on, there are economic considerations. What can I afford? I'm looking for economic gains, but I also want to empower employees. And so it's an exciting new chapter, but with a whole host of fresh new challenges to be solved for.
Yeah, it's interesting that you touched on the health and safety piece, because the three of you all talked about the place component of people in place, and the fact that place is now fluid. I mean, that is why you're liquid space, for example, right? That space and place is no longer defined by a building or a desk. It's more sort of work is where the work happens.
Or
And
no longer just prescribed by the employer. It's
Right,
not
right.
You're in this desk or you're in this
Yeah.
cube or this office. Yeah.
So then the question, I guess, is what does that mean for the people? Right. At the end of the day, I mean, all of this is, yes, there is the obvious kind of economic optimization. I don't know if it's a gain, but it's a right sizing, if you will, of how much space do we actually need, and how much space can we move from a fixed to some sort of subscription model. So all those are kind of, there's the asset related optimization, but from an engagement and a employee health and safety and the people side of people in place, I'm curious to see what you're seeing from, the people that work for your clients. We're seeing some interesting things where the burden is now on the employers still to make the workplace welcoming, and the looming factor of like, is it safe to go in, right? That still is lingering, right? So it's this whole question of, do I ask for your vaccination record? Is that allowed? Is that creepy if I ask for it? If you ask for it, what are the privacy jurisdictions that control how long you're allowed to keep that? I'm still creeped out by touching surfaces. So can you make it touchless? If I'm going to come in for a given day, are my buddies going to be there? Because then we can work on a project together, right? So all those are some of the things we're seeing that our clients are asking for. But I'm curious what you guys are hearing from the people side now that the shape of the place is changing. Just sort of an open question
It's
to the group here.
It's a very interesting. I mean, I guess again, it depends on the culture and the geographies that we're talking about. Certainly within the UK, and I still see this in Belgium. I see this in the Netherlands and going further east into Germany. Individuals don't necessarily have the available space at home to be able to productively operate unhindered in their roles. So you sort of think, well, home working is a great solution. Businesses can capitalize on that and we can reduce our space, but it actually opens up the need for variable space, because I can't work from a 1-bedroom flat and still be productive in the role that I have. So the impact for the employee is a balance between what they can do at home, wish to do at home. What we found was, certainly in some of the surveys that we have seen occur, is that individuals in the first lockdown, because we're on number 2, and I think others may be on number 3. But in the first lockdown, we saw a great positive reaction to the ability to work from home. That was much, much less in lockdown 2. It became very much more difficult for them to sustain that in an effective way. So for the individual, it's a challenge to be able to work from home, so they have to go somewhere. And then you have the practicalities of actually them working somewhere. And what we found is some of the more efficient space, in other words, the real estate that is 40, 50 stories high, getting resources into the building in a practical way is very, very difficult if you are going to be conscious of the COVID implications of getting into a building, sanitizing and so forth. So you find that anything over 5 floors is a challenge. So now what we're seeing is looking for single story meeting points. This hub and spoke, same principle, I call it slightly differently, but it's the same thinking, in order to create some kind of collaborative space that they don't have to travel for, because this was the other interesting dynamic, and we're still facing it. Certainly if you go into London at the moment, public transport's only operating at 40% capacity. So you're not going to get people to your office even if you wanted to. So, you're looking at something different. And we are very lucky, certainly in the UK, because we have a space opportunity in the high street. Retail's been hammered, so there's an opportunity in there. But it's the same principle. From an individual's perspective, however, going into any space, there is a much greater focus on self-help. If you are going to go into the space, whether it's owned by the the company, your employer or not, how you act in that space is for you. You have to sanitize when you enter. You have to sanitize when you leave. You clean your workstation. So we're not necessarily doing more of it. We are forcing the employee to take responsibility and accountability for their own actions whilst they're occupying that space. And that makes a massive difference to how people feel about the space when they go into it.
If I may, Harish,
Please.
The customers that we sell to, the people that adopt our platform are typically workplace and real estate, and more recently even HR people leaders. And the overarching sort of philosophy or framing that they're bringing to reentry is framed by this new policy of autonomy and choice. Annie will be given the option, but not the mandate to come back into some environment. That environment might be a near home hub. That environment might be a near colleague co-working space, or it might be the traditional office that she exited 13 months ago. And we're seeing pretty consistently, not entirely, but pretty consistently, there's a real caution on the part of those leaders who are welcoming back. There's a recognition that we're deep into new patterns having been set. There's an understanding that, look, these employees have been, to varying degrees of success, working at home for 13 plus months. We're deep into behavior change. And it's going to take more than just providing them with the autonomy and choice to reenter. There's an awareness that their emotional needs are going to need to be set. Like, there are concerns around health and safety and fear factors that are very real. And so whatever program or platform is deployed to bring employees back, it has to attend to the emotional needs, the emotional health of the employee. There are the functional needs, like most thoughtful leaders are recognizing they need to create an enticement, not a mandate, but an enticement to draw those employees back, right? So not only do the environments have to feel safe, but they've got to sort of resell the notion that, listen, collaboration in person can be a good thing. We've all been cracking on with Zoom effectively, in some relish it, but of course there's a magic and an additive aspect of both the cultural as well as the work productivity that happens when you're scrumming on a whiteboard in a room, for example. And so the case has to be made. Like, the environments have to be enticing, but there are kit gloves being applied, which I think is appropriate. Right? So we're not just going to lurch back into mandate and expect it, but I think we're expecting to see, autonomy and choice given, gutters and policies, rails and guidelines applied, and then we're all together in a sales job. Like, we've got to earnestly, authentically make the case for place. Mm-hmm. Annie, I know you got more to say on that. I'll climb up.
Well, I mean, it's funny, Mark. On Monday, I had a heads down day, and I was at my home office. Yesterday, I was at my HQ, and today I'm at one of our co-working locations because it's close to my home and I can bike there, and it's a beautiful day in Houston. So, it's interesting because, I mean, I'm fortunate that I work for an office company, and so I have sort of all these different options. But, I don't think that me working for Heinz is the driving factor there. I think, that you're right that, working from home, not only on the Heinz side, but for me, it's become something that I think is more acceptable. I prefer it when I'm having those head down days because I know that there's not as many distractions in the office, but those distractions I also enjoy oftentimes, which is why I went to the HQ yesterday, why I'm here at our co-working space today. Tomorrow, I think I have another heads down day, so I'll probably be my home office, but it is that optionality that I personally enjoy. And I know, you can talk to 100 different people and you're going to have 100 different opinions about where they want to work, how many days a week. But I think a lot of the research that we've done sort of says that like on either extreme is where you start to lose engagement. So if we're looking at none of the time, working remote, I think we lose engagement. The research that I've seen is generally none of the time you're at like 30% engagement, all of the time you're similar. And so either extreme, I think, is where we start to lose engagement. And it's when we have that median ground where between 60 and 80%. And so that might be 1 day a week, it might be 2 days a week, it might vary week to week, depending on what meetings and goals you have for that week. But the reality is that it's just not a binary option anymore, which again, that wasn't the conversation even, pre-COVID 2 years ago. If you think about, back to 8 years ago from a technology standpoint, it was binary because technology forced us to be that. What the type of work that we did forced us to be binary, or at least it didn't give us the optionality to not be binary. It said that this is the type of work that you're doing, this is the technology, and it exists in the office, and so you go to the office, and that's it, period. Like that was a hard stop. But now the type of work that we're doing has changed dramatically because of technology, and the technology itself has changed dramatically in our homes and in our cell phones, in our pockets. And so that just allows for this, non-binary function within office. Like office, you said this, Harish, already, like office exists anywhere now. And so, as an employer, that means that you do need to rethink the physical HQ, because why are people going there? And that's when you start to see the shift, not necessarily of space initially, but that the office just becomes a different type of product, that it's not this functional place where managers are overseeing employees and it's this control thing. It is now becoming this place where it's about creativity and community, and it's supposed to express your brand and your culture and your values, and all of that is driving into the office, and that's why people are going there. And so I think, it's one of the most fascinating case studies, not only just, I think, where we are today from a technology standpoint, but once you layer on COVID and what's happened over the last 18 months, it's pretty incredible just to see the shift that we're having and start to understand what that's going to mean for the future.
And not only is it not binary for Annie, the individual employee, like it's not HQ or home, as you've just illustrated, it's your own tailored set of choices across multiple locations. It's also not uniform. It's not uniform across employees. Like the titration or the distribution of where an individual employee chooses to work is going to vary on that distribution curve. So, employers have to contemplate, how do I enable a measure of tailoring or personalization down to the employee level? And then how do I do that efficiently at scale? Because every employee optimization.
It's almost like every manager has become a UX designer in some sense.
Yes.
But instead of UX, they're designing the flow
WX.
of their people,
Yeah.
right? Like space is no longer a destination. Space is just part of the experience. And so
some might say it's a service.
So yeah, SaaS, the new SaaS, the new S2 SaaS. We just created a category. Boom. And it's this whole concept of like, it's almost like you mentioned active management. I think that also goes down to the manager of every team. Yeah. If you have even one direct report, it's sort of, or if you're leading an agile team, right? It's on you to think through like, what is the ideal experience that we can deliver via technology, mobile technology, preferably to each of those people. And then also the people that might be coming to meet them, right? So it's kind of like this notion of the, Neil, you mentioned if the tube is only running at 40% capacity, what are the days where it's going to be less crowded? How do I integrate that data to decide when I want to go in, right?
I can see your point. I can see your point.
Yeah.
I would say that there is there is a requirement. So we're talking about how best to utilize space or provide the working solution to the individual. There's a massive cultural shift in how businesses manage themselves, not least of which is how they manage their people. When we mentioned strategy early on, you know, what you're seeing is a, for some organizations that were hugely traditional and binary, as Annie would put it 2 years ago, now have to think very, very differently, including the empowerment of their own staff, which historically was never on their agenda necessarily. It was never in their mind. Their management systems don't even cope with it at the moment because they just don't think that way or have not historically thought that way. So we do have a responsibility, I guess, or opportunity to seek to change that way of managing a business. And that enables people more opportunity to work in a more fluid way on a day-to-day basis. So we've got this sort of effort coming in from the bottom up. There's also change required from the top down for us to meet, you know, effectively in the middle. And one of the critical areas is the economic implication of not making that change is a driver to enable space fluid, the fluid development and use of space, is how I would put it. Circumstances are right, you know, it's a perfect storm. There's a number of factors, and now people are having to shift the way they think. But one of the limitations that we've got to keep our eyes on here is the cost of the technology to enable all of this to occur. And that is quite high. And, you know, it's not a good time for that investment. So I can see that being a bit of a break on some of the thinking around setting up the space, variants of space for people.
Yeah, I think there's an economic argument to be made, you know, putting on, Mark, to your point about putting on my sales hat, is to say, look, you know, you have an obvious cost saving or cost optimization from your footprint perspective, but you have a bigger long-term impact that if you don't invest in creating these personalized, customized experiences for every employee, the engagement and therefore productivity impact thereof will be way bigger, will outweigh, you know, any cost saving that you may get in the short term from right sizing your space. So curious on that. Like I know it's a very nebulous topic, but we're all in the knowledge business. So I'm just curious what your take is on like the engagement as a leading indicator of productivity driven by person in place.
I mean, to Neil's comment and to your question, like the majority of the clients that we're working with are seeing and have reason to expect relatively near-term total workplace ROIs, positive ROIs, inclusive of the cost of the flexible office that they're going to be increasingly using, inclusive of the cost of the technology tools like Liquid Space and others that they're wielding to implement those things, like substantially positive ROIs. You know, as they rationalize their fixed footprints, as they, in essence, move to a workplace world where there is zero waste. I mean, that's one of the enormously appealing aspects of shifting to sort of more on-demand and short-term use of space. You directly attack the long-standing inefficiency of the underutilized office, and so I think from a planning standpoint, as those people in the audience that are listening to this rich discussion contemplate, should I and how should I approach, you know, workplace transformation? I would start with a presumption that you have the very real opportunity for a total workplace, a positive ROI, and not 10 years down the road, you know, 1, 2, 3 years down the road, actionable.
When I think when you're thinking about ROI, you know, there's sort of the ROI on the employer side. And then, you know, me thinking about Heinz, like thinking about our ROI on the, you know, as an owner of office buildings. And so, you know, it's interesting, and this might be a little controversial, but if you think about, you know, I come from a background of working in flex office, working in co-working. We have always had to have a hospitality mindset, a mindset of how do we attract people to this space? How do we get them to come and work out of here? Because they've always had other options of places to go and work. It's competition, it's a traditional office, it's spec suite, it's their home office, it's a coffee shop down the street. And so, you know, what flex office and co-working did from the beginning was create this environment, create this community, create this hospitality, and create this experience out of office. And that was fundamentally different than the office ever experienced. And people started to get a taste of it, and they started to be more mainstream with WeWork going everywhere. And all of a sudden people are like, wait a second, you're telling me that office can be hospitality, it can be experience, it can be services, it can be amenities, it can be all of these things that I'm seeing. And so now all of a sudden, fast forward to the world post-COVID, where office environments need to have that same engagement to attract people back into them. And so really, like, the office world just needs to learn a lot from the flex office world and the co-working world in terms of how property managers think and how they factor and function more like community managers in co-working, and the types of amenities and services that we're putting into our office buildings. You know, it needs to function more like a flex office or co-working environment than the traditional office, which, again, you know, if we're in real estate, we're in hospitality, and that's got to be how we think about it into the future. And I know that's it's slightly different as an owner of a building versus an occupier of a building, but I think a lot of those same elements apply on the occupier side for, you know, teams that are trying to get their employees back into the office as well. We need to do it as landlords. It's how we need to think about offices into the future for our office buildings that are being developed today, for them to be sustainable for 10 plus years into the future. You know, we need to have flex office, we need to have amenities, we need to have hospitality. Our teams that manage those projects need to be trained and hired and thought of differently. And that's just what we need to do as Hines to succeed going forward, I think.
And those owners like Hines and British Land and Granite and Tishman and EQ, who've embraced those principles that Annie, like the experience first, that we're in the experience business, they've demonstrated that there is an economic premium. There's value to that. This isn't a net sum zero gain. That like indeed, this is the bright spot on the office supply landscape. I can charge more. Customers are happy to pay more for a better experience, and they're happy to pay for term flexibility. And so I think, you know, part of this, like, there's a rebalancing happening on the occupier side as portfolios get rationalized and work gets distributed to hubs and spokes. And there's a rebalancing happening within the asset management strategies of the leading institutional owners, who are recognizing, I'm going to shift my asset strategy from, you know, 97% long-term leasing to significantly more flexible term products, and I'm going to enjoy strong economics around that.
Excellent. So switching over into sort of the payoff of what I was mentioning at the beginning. So I just want to kind of go through the panelists and say, if you were to leave the audience here and the, you know, audience and posterity with, you know, your top 1 or 2 takeaways to say, like, this is, if you want to get ready for this new way of working, like, you got to do this now, that what would that be? So Neil, let's take it over to you. What would you recommend to any client walking your door, or any of our participants saying, what do I do?
Well, I think there's 2 things. I think that that I would leave with. There's an awful lot to talk about, but 2 things particularly. The first is the alignment to where the business is. That what we do from a real estate perspective is directly related to what the business wants its business to do and how it functions. And I get the different approaches to space, but you really got to keep aligned to where the business is and what it can afford to do. And the second thing for me is self-help. We are in an environment where people need to take accountability for their own actions and and become responsible themselves when they are in any space, not just office space, home space, or hospitality space. They should take responsibility. And I think, you know, expecting people to do that is not unrealistic in today's world. So those would be the two things.
Cool. Annie, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, it's not binary anymore. People will, I've seen a lot of surveys about hiring managers and, today in today's environment, if you're not offering optionality, it's going to be hard to hire. And so you need to understand that. And so with that, I think two important takeaways, one is this concept of that we're in hospitality and you need to provide a type of experience. But I think, what that really means to you is that you have got to take an active management role in managing your space. If people are coming to the office, like I said, if you want those interactions to happen, you can't just hope that it happens because the probabilities don't align. And so you've got to take an active management role. And that means, I think, a number of different things. And it comes down to the technology, it comes down to the finance of the company. But I think, takeaway here is actively managing your space is going to be a requirement going forward.
Mark, how about yourself?
I'll squeeze in three, but I'll do it quick. Number one, I think you should go hire somebody like Neil. Like you should bring in an external expert who can help you thoughtfully consider with an objective third-party perspective the strategies, right? Certainly your current estate is going to evolve. It might transform or at least evolve. So you got to go hire Neil. Step two, you need to, I think, recognize that the form and the nature of the supply base, workplace supply base, is radically shifting. You should go talk to Annie at Heinz. You should acquaint yourself with the hospitality forward, the people-centric orientation that's coming from new actors and players, not just the co-working spaces and serviced offices that have long delivered hospitality, but recognize that folks like Heinz are leaping into this in a very, very credible way. And then thirdly, I would encourage a measure of humility that tapping into or harnessing the flexible office landscape through which you can get zero waste, through which you can get more employee productivity. It's a multidimensional challenge. Like we would certainly encourage you to recognize and explore that there are technology platforms that can help you do that in a managed way with data insights and controls and duty of care considerations so that your employees are safe, so that your economic objectives are met. And on that end, you ought to talk to Liquid Space.
Excellent. From my end, so thank you. From my end, I would say, it's in the lines, if you will, between an employee and a contractor and a visitor, like all these people that are going to places, they're all blurring because employees now, if they're going to co-working spaces or visiting employees, like all those lines are changing. And so it's the responsibility of, I would say, every manager to really think through, like, what is the experience that I want to offer my people, right? You're now no longer just in the business of, are they getting their job done? But it's like, how are they engaging with the totality of the work from the minute they wake up till the minute they decide to come in? What does that look like? Am I crafting an experience that helps them connect with their other coworkers? Where does that happen? And ultimately, how do I make this safe? Because if the safety on all, you could argue there's a Maslow's hierarchy of safety. Like if the safety is not met on all those levels, no one's coming in and no one's going to feel engaged. So there's, this whole return to work movement can only happen if every frontline manager of people is thinking about, how do I craft this experience for my people? And space is the other side of that coin. And so I would say, understand what your people want, understand the places and the space they want to connect to, and it's your job to craft that experience and deploy the right, easy to use mobile technology to make that happen. So I would say that kind of would be my takeaway to bring all this together. Thank you very much, and have a good one. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you, Anna, for setting all this up.
Thanks
Stay
to the
safe.
attendees. Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye, guys.